Early in the morning, I'm waking, baking, drinking, contemplating. What's up, my dudes? MXGP 1 versus MXGP 2 versus MXGP 3. Got us a little 1, 2, 3 here, boys. So, believe it or not, I've never actually made a video comparing all three of these games specifically in one particular video, so I thought it would be a pretty cool thing because if you guys know these MXGP games and you know Milestone, you kind of know that, you know, MXGP 1, 2, and 3 is kind of its own entity when you start comparing it to, like, you know, Milestone's first dirt bike game ever, the Mud game, which came out before the first MXGP game, and then when you started going to, like, the official Supercross games and MXGP Pro and MXGP 2019, it just kind of became an entirely different thing. I mean, there's a whole, like, group of people, and I know there is because I've seen them comment. I've seen, you know, a lot of people have this opinion like MXGP 3 was a better game than, you know, MXGP Pro, MXGP 2019, and I actually agree with that in a lot of different ways. You know, obviously those newer MXGP games are better in some ways, but, like, I mean, there is a lot of arguments you can make that MXGP 3 was one of the best, you know, Milestone outdoor motocross games they've ever made before. So, but this video in particular is comparing all three games directly. So, the way I would sort of explain it is it was kind of like, you know, MXGP 1 is completely different than the original Mud game, okay? But once they got to MXGP 1, it's kind of like when you go from MXGP 1 to MXGP 2 to MXGP 3, it's like this very, very steady progression. None of these games changed a whole lot in between them. It's not like you had some crazy different thing, you know, between the first, second, and third MXGP game, but at the same time, it kept this very consistent progression to where you never felt like you were taking a step backwards either. So, you see what I'm saying? Whereas it's like, when they tried to start going to MXGP Pro, they made an epically failed attempt at trying to make a not hit a button play an animation whip system. Absolutely atrocious. You know, they were trying to free up their whips, trying to do all this crazy stuff, which they should have been doing, but the whole problem was they make 5,000 games every single year, so they don't even give themselves enough time to even remotely, you know, properly add the right amount of improvements to the game and actually test their systems before they release it in a new game. So that's why you got that weird-ass janky whip system in that, you know, right around that, like, MXGP Pro Supercross 2 days, because they were trying to transition from that super literal hit a button playing an animation whip system to an actual, you know, real whip system to a motocross game. And they didn't really get there until they got all the way to Supercross 3. So either way, that's my whole point, though. That's one kind of interesting thing when you go back to the first, second, third MXGP game, is the fact that they never really took a step backwards with any of the games. The games just got steadily better and better and better and better. So it's just like, you know what I'm saying? It's just like MXGP 2 is a better MXGP 1, and MXGP 3 is a better MXGP 2. But you can't really necessarily say that MXGP Pro is just a better MXGP 3, or MXGP 2019 is just a better MXGP Pro. You can't really say that because they created so many more other issues out of nowhere that just didn't make a whole lot of sense. So let's go to MXGP 2, kind of compare some of the gameplay elements. You can kind of see, you know, MXGP 1 is where this whole official Milestone dual stick control, very, very restrictive feeling on the bike. Yeah, the game functions. There's not like some super janky mechanic or some super buggy, you know, type deal to it necessarily, but it is a very, very restrictive, especially for a AAA, you know, motocross game out there. It is a very restrictive physics system to it. Okay, so here we are on MXGP 2, and one of the things you'll notice right away is with the original MXGP game, the only tracks in the entire game are the, that certain particular year of the MXGP series. With MXGP 2, they actually advance the content in the game. With this game, you get a stadium series with literally 4 indoor Supercross tracks on it in their official motocross game. Don't ever give me that stupid ass, excuse that if it's an official motocross game, it shouldn't have Supercross tracks, and if it's an official Supercross game, it's not supposed to have motocross tracks, or it can't have motocross tracks. Bro, they did this in MXGP 2, okay? That's what makes it so frustrating in some of the later Milestone games. They already did this crap. You even have a test track in this game. Like, hello? Yeah, it's just a steady progression. That's really what it is. This was the most consistent time in Milestone's history of making these games, was MXGP 1 to MXGP 3. And back in those days, you got to remember, back in these days, they weren't making 2 motocross games a year or 2 dirt bike games a year. Yeah, they were still making their street bike games and ride games, whatever the hell other games. Milestone literally shits out 10 trillion games a year. It's insane. But once they start getting to the point of the first Supercross game and MXGP Pro and Supercross 2 and MXGP 2019, once they got to that point where they were making a motocross game and a Supercross game 2 games a year, 2 dirt bike games a year per year, it just got insane. It got so obvious. The lack of time they had to test the systems in the game, the lack of time they had to put polish on their games, and you saw the result of it. I mean, holy crap. It was crazy. But anyways, point being is, back in the MXGP 1, 2, and 3 days, these games, if I'm not mistaken, I think they came out 1 game a year. That's kind of the timeline of all the games. But yeah, this is basically, MXGP 2 is basically just MXGP 1 with slightly more movement on the bike, better looking graphics, more of a turn feel in the game. And that's the thing, it's not like a crazy difference, you know what I mean? This game is very, very similar to that first MXGP game. If you sat down, people that did not know anything about this shit, you could literally set them down with the same rider on both games on the same track, and I swear to God, some people wouldn't even actually be able to notice the difference, right? So when it comes to the actual gameplay, there really isn't a whole lot. Okay, so this is when they actually added the weird-ass turn both your thumbsticks opposite directions to, hit the button and play the one whip animation sort of system to their game, right? You can see how that sort of progressed from the first MXGP game. You were barely even turning it over at all. And then this one, you can kind of get it. It's like the first MXGP game is like that local kid that doesn't know how to whip, but he thinks he does, right? And then MXGP 2 is like some amateur rider that can whip a little bit, but they can't really get the bike turned over, right? And then when you get to MXGP 3, it's like, a dude that actually halfway knows what he's doing when he's trying to throw a whip. This game almost feels like you can't even bring the whip back in a way, too. They've went through a lot of different renditions of all that to try to get this weird-ass... The problem is in the core of these games, though, and I've been saying this forever. The problem with these Milestone games from the very beginning is it's all in the core of it, right? It's the fact that they tried to make this weird-ass, restrictive, filling on the bike, hit a button, play an animation whip system. The core of their... I've heard some people make this comparison of like, it's like they just took their... like they just took their street bike racing game physics and tried to throw it into a motocross game and just hoped that it worked, right? You do kind of get that vibe when you go back to these tracks, go back to these games. This is the free ride track of MXGP 3. So they had a free ride track in MXGP 2 and MXGP 3 when it first came out for free, not paid DLC, and then you didn't even get one in the first Supercross game, okay? So, yeah, you should be able to see some of the differences in the graphical look of everything. You can definitely, this game I can already tell you runs a lot smoother than MXGP 1 and 2, so they definitely made some, optimization improvements and things along those lines. I'm not even sure what I have my graphics set on this right now, but, like, instantaneously you can tell they improved on the movement on the bike and the kind of freeness that it feels like you have on the bike. So it's just kind of that steady progression, right? Like if you go from MXGP 1 to MXGP 2, you're probably not going to notice that big of a difference. And if you go from MXGP 2 to MXGP 3, you might not notice that big of a difference. But if you go from MXGP 1 to MXGP 3, you will notice, quite a little bit of a difference. So that's basically what it comes down to. But it's a pretty sick little freeride track right here. I remember playing on this when this first came out. But yeah, the problem with these milestone games is there is this weird, like they have tried to carry over some sort of street bike racing game. It's pretty obvious that they did that to some extent because they were making street bike racing games way before, these motocross games. So it's pretty obvious. That's why you have that sort of, Milestone is known for their on-ground physics. This shit's so obvious, it's insane. But, Milestone is so known for their on-ground physics and known for how terrible their air and whip physics have been forever. I know with Supercross 3, things have started getting better, 8 games later. But, that's probably what happened right there. They basically took their street bike racing game physics, tweaked upon it a little bit, and then made it into a dirt bike, and that's what you got in the first MXGP game, basically. It's basically what that game is. It's like a slow-ass street bike that can't hardly jump or move, and yeah. So, but it is very interesting to see that, right? So see, now when you're throwing the whip animation, it's almost like it's doing a little bit more of a, instead of just a normal ass, like throwing it out to the side like it did on MXGP2, it's kind of like you're almost doing a little bit of a turn down whip. The point being, it is still just hitting a button and playing the same animation whip over and over and over. It's the same thing. It's not like it's an actual whip system. It's just not. So let's try to go to the same track. I just wanted to show that there is a Launch Trinity, Mex Nations. Yeah, did they not even have the in-stadium Supercross tracks in MXGP3? That was a little like, what the hell? You had it in MXGP2? Ah, no, just fuck adding, a little bit more content to our already lacking content games. Nah, screw that, dog. But the worst of the worst was the first official Supercross game. Oh my god. But I don't see like an actual stadium series in MXGP3, so that's a little weird. But track selection. Alrighty then. Hell yeah, brother. Okay. So basically that's what it comes down to, It's a lot harder for Milestone to make, or it was a lot harder because it's like they were taking that core physics from their street bike racing games or some super restrictive weird-ass core physics that it was almost like they just couldn't even make the proper changes to their games, not only because they were making too many games too frequently, but also just the fact that it was like their physics were fucked at the core. You know what I mean? Their physics were jacked at the absolute core of it. So you can't, and what they tried to do was just do top surface layer changes to the physics, top surface layer Band-Aid physics, when in reality what they needed to do at the very beginning, like, way along in the cycles of the games, is they should have completely done surgery, dug all the way down to those physics, made an actual whip system to the game, not just hitting a button, playing an animation, give you more of a turning, filling in the game, give you more of an actual, gravitational inertia filling to the bike in the game. All that stuff, you got to dig down in the physics to get it to even do that. So and that's kind of what you started to see with Supercross 3. So, and it's cool. I mean, we're only seeing one motocross or one dirt bike game out of Milestone so far in 2020. So maybe they're kind of changing their ways and going back to their old ways of just doing one game a year and actually making proper improvements to their games and testing their systems before they come out with it. Holy God, that whip system when Supercross 2 first came out, good Lord. I don't think it's ever been worse than that. That was terrible. So yeah. But, at the end of the day, when you start trying to compare, like, MXGP 3 to, Alive or whatever, it really isn't even comparable. It really isn't. Especially, I mean, we obviously know it's not comparable to Reflex or anything like that, but just, in the fact that it took them 5, 6, 7 games to get their shit together, with Supercross 3, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. Like, when you go back and look at the evolution between MX Unleashed to MX versus ATV Unleashed to MX versus ATV Untamed to Reflex, that is a crazy different improvement. Every one of those games is completely different, right? Whereas these Milestone games, it's like you got to go through 3 or 4 of their games to feel that same kind of difference. Pretty insane when you really think about it. But, yeah, kind of bizarre that MXGP3 just doesn't have any of the Stadium Supercross tracks. A little disappointed by that, but it is what it is, brother. So, as far as the way the tracks are designed in all 3 of these games, I mean, it's just all kind of really similar. Yeah, the jumps might have got a little bigger by the time you got to MXGP3, but it's not like they started adding, pre-made inside ruts or really adding bigger berms. It's really just the graphics improved and the feeling on the bike, physics on the bike just barely improved going from MXGP 1, 2 to 3. But other than that, it's really just a graphical improvement. That's all it is. It's a graphical optimization improvement and just a very slight improvement to the physics of it. You know what I mean? That's all it really is. There's just not a lot of difference in the tracks and the way the ruts, and there's really no roughness on any of these tracks. There's no braking bumps. There's no ruts. There's no really big jumps or anything like that. They are very basic in that sense and, can get boring very quickly when you realize that about these games. They're missing the entire element of what makes motocross, having actual roughness skill gap, hardcore pre-made rut skill gap, all that kind of shit is just totally missing in, pretty much all these MXGP games. It's kind of insane when you go back and realize that, how basic certain aspects of these Milestone games are. It's mind-baffling. It is crazy. And to think these games came out like 4, 5, 6 years after Reflex, whew, that don't even make sense, bro. That don't even make sense. So